every suitor failed to charm the Sultan, until he heard a breath behind the curtain. From the outside, the palace seemed a place of grandeur, with marble floors polished to perfection and gardens that bloomed in colors so vivid they could steal a passerby's breath. But within those walls, something darker lingered, a weight that no light could touch. Sultan Rashid was a man of unmatched power. His eyes, sharp as falcons, could command armies and bend kingdoms to his will. He had the strength of a lion and the wisdom of the oldest scholars. Yet beneath the crown and robes, there was a hollow that no wealth, no gold, and no praise could fill. For Rashid carried a curse, an invisible chain that kept love at bay. Every suitor who had ever come to the palace, hoping to win his heart, had failed. Some had gone mad, some had fled, and others had quietly surrendered their desires, their hearts broken by the invisible barrier that wrapped itself around Rashid like a shadow. Tonight, the palace was quiet. The lamps in the grand hall flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the city of Almarith slept under a blanket of stars, unaware of the sorrow that lay within the gilded walls of their sultan's home. Rashid sat alone in his throne room, the weight of the crown pressing against his temples. His gaze wandered across the hall where tapestries told stories of ancestors long gone, victories won, and enemies defeated. And yet the victories meant nothing to him, for no triumph could pierce the emptiness of his heart. A procession of suitors had arrived just this week. Young princes from distant lands, merchants with riches beyond imagination, even a scholar who claimed he could unlock the secrets of the soul. One by one, they had come with hope and ambition, each believing that they could conquer the Sultan's heart. And one by one they had failed. Some tried flattery, bowing with practiced grace. Others tried gifts, filling the hall with gold, jewels, and rare silks. But Rashid's heart remained untouched, closed to every plea, every gesture, every word spoken in his name. He rose from his throne and walked through the hall, his footsteps echoing like a drum in the silent night. The air smelled of incense and candle wax, mingling with the faint scent of roses from the palace gardens. His mind wandered to the stories he had heard as a child, tales of an ancient curse laid upon his family, a shadow that grew stronger with each generation. Some whispered that it was a punishment for pride, others believed it was the wrath of a forgotten god. Whatever the reason, Rashid had lived with its weight for as long as he could remember. As he walked, a sudden sound caught his attention, a faint, almost imperceptible breath from behind a heavy velvet curtain that draped one side of the hall. Rashid paused, every sense alert. The palace was empty, the servants had been dismissed hours ago, and no guest dared move freely at this hour. Yet there it was again, a soft, deliberate breath, a whisper of life in the stillness. Slowly he approached the curtain, his hand resting on the hilt of the ceremonial dagger at his side, not for violence, but for instinct. The fabric was heavy and luxurious, dyed in deep crimson with golden threads that shimmered in the lamplight. He reached out, parting the curtain with a careful hand, and peered into the shadowed corner beyond. There, standing silently, was a figure he did not recognize. The stranger's eyes met his own, steady and unflinching, and in that gaze Rashid felt a stir of something unfamiliar. It was not fear, not awe, not the flattery that countless others had offered. It was something quieter, deeper, as if the person had seen him, not the Sultan, not the ruler, not the curse, but the man beneath the crown. "Who are you?" Rashid's voice was low, measured, carrying the authority of a man used to command. The stranger inclined their head slightly. "Someone who has waited," they said, their voice soft but clear, like a stream flowing over smooth stones. "I have come not for your gold nor for your throne. I have come for what you hide." Rashid's brow furrowed. Few dared speak to him like this. Few were still without trembling. There was a daring in the stranger's presence, a confidence that was at once unsettling and magnetic. He felt a strange curiosity, a pull toward the person that he had not felt in years. "Then you are foolish," he said, though his tone betrayed a trace of wonder. "For what I hide is cursed. Every soul who tried to touch it has been destroyed." The stranger smiled faintly, a hint of sadness beneath the curve of their lips. "And yet you remain here, waiting for someone to try again. Why?" Rashid's eyes darkened, haunted. "Because even I do not know if the curse is stronger than hope," he admitted, almost to himself. "Perhaps there is one who will not be afraid of the darkness." They stood in silence for a long moment, the space between them charged with unspoken words, a tension that thrummed like a string stretched taut. The Sultan had felt many things in his life: anger, fear, desire, pride, but never this. It was a dangerous, compelling sensation, like walking along the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall could be fatal, yet unable to step back. Finally, the stranger moved slightly forward, stepping fully into the lamplight. Rashid saw now that they bore the marks of a life spent in hardship. A faint scar along the jaw, hands worn from labor or battle, eyes that had witnessed loss and longing. And yet there was an elegance in their movement, a quiet strength that rivaled even the Sultan's own. "You are not like the others," Rashid said, his voice almost a whisper. "You do not tremble, you do not beg, you do not worship." The stranger inclined their head again. "I do not need to worship what is already broken," they said. "Nor do I fear what others call cursed. I came because I believe what is hidden can be healed. Even shadows can find light if they are willing." Rashid felt a lump in his throat, a sensation he had not experienced in years. The words were simple, yet they struck a chord deep within him. He had spent a lifetime guarded by walls of power and fear, but here was someone who had come not to conquer or to flee, but to understand. A sudden sound from the gardens beyond the hall broke the spell, an owl calling in the distance, a faint rustle of leaves. Rashid turned slightly, alert, and then back to the stranger. "You speak of healing," he said cautiously. "Do you even know what that means? Do you know what it would take to undo the darkness that has lived in me my entire life?" The stranger's gaze did not waver. "I do not know the full price," they admitted, "but I know that to live in fear of what cannot be changed is worse than any curse. You have waited a long time for someone to come without fear. I am here. If you allow me, I will stay." Rashid looked at them for a long time, the weight of centuries pressing upon his shoulders. He had never trusted easily. He had never allowed anyone close, for the world had taught him that power and love could not coexist. And yet, here was someone who did not run. Someone who had crossed the threshold of fear to stand before him. He let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. "You may be brave, or you may be foolish," he said, a shadow of a smile touching his lips. "I cannot promise safety, nor can I promise what comes next. But I will watch and I will listen." The stranger inclined their head, accepting his terms without question. And in that simple gesture, a bridge began to form, fragile, unsteady, but alive. As the night deepened, the two remained in the throne room, talking quietly, sharing fragments of themselves. Rashid spoke of the loneliness that had become a companion, of the expectations that weighed upon him like iron chains. The stranger spoke of journeys taken, hardships endured, and the hope that even in darkness, one could find light. And somewhere in the silence between words, a subtle shift began. The curse that had held the Sultan's heart captive for so long seemed to stir, not with fury or malice but with curiosity. Perhaps it had met its match. Perhaps, for the first time, a soul had appeared that refused to bow, refused to fear, refused to break. Hours passed like minutes, and when dawn finally crept across the palace towers, painting the marble floors with golden light, Rashid felt something he had not known in years. The stirring of hope, fragile and dangerous, yet undeniable. And just as he dared to imagine the possibility of change, the stranger stepped back, their eyes meeting his with a look that promised more than words could say. "I will return," they whispered, almost like a promise, almost like a challenge. But the journey has only begun. Rashid watched as they vanished into the shadows beyond the curtain, leaving the echo of their presence in the stillness. His hand brushed the fabric where they had stood, and for the first time in countless years he felt a tremor in his chest, a longing that was not fear, nor desire, nor emptiness, but the hint of something far greater: connection. And somewhere deep within the Sultan, a thought dared to bloom, fragile and dangerous as dawn itself. Perhaps, this time it might be different. The palace remained quiet, yet it no longer felt empty. For in the darkness behind the crimson curtain, a new chapter had begun, one of hope, of courage, and of a love that might at last pierce the shadows of a sultan's heart. The morning sun spread its light slowly across the palace of Sultan Rashid, painting the golden towers and marble halls in gentle gold. Yet inside the walls, the Sultan felt no warmth. The presence of the stranger lingered like a shadow, vivid in his mind. He could not forget the calm courage in their eyes, the way they had spoken as if he were not the Sultan, but a man in need of understanding. That small encounter had stirred something within him, a feeling he had not felt in decades: curiosity. For the first time in years, Rashid found himself walking the palace corridors with a purpose beyond duty. His mind replayed every word the stranger had spoken, every glance exchanged. Who were they? Why had they come? And most importantly, why had they not been afraid of him? The Sultan's advisors noticed his restless pace. "Your Highness," whispered Minister Darin, an elderly man with a careful tongue, "perhaps you should rest. The palace has been quiet for weeks. Surely a pause would do you well." Rashid shook his head. "I am not weary from rest, Darin," he said, his voice low, thoughtful. "I am thinking, and sometimes thinking leads to action." Action. That word echoed in the empty corridors. Rashid had ruled for decades, commanding armies, signing treaties, punishing enemies. But never had he acted for the sake of curiosity, for the sake of a fleeting connection. That thought made his chest tighten. Late that afternoon, Rashid found himself in the palace garden, a place few ventured when the sun was high. The flowers bloomed in colors that seemed impossible: deep crimson roses, golden tulips, silver lilies that glimmered faintly in the sunlight. The air smelled of jasmine and warm earth. Yet, even here, the Sultan felt the weight of solitude pressing upon him. And then, as if drawn by fate, he saw movement among the hedges near the northern fountain. A figure emerged from the shadows, careful, quiet, almost floating over the marble path. Rashid's heart leapt. It was the stranger. They looked different in daylight, softer yet no less compelling. Their dark hair fell loosely over their shoulders, eyes as sharp and calm as they had been at night. "You came," Rashid said, his voice a mixture of surprise and relief. The stranger inclined their head. "I promised I would," they replied, "but only at the right time. Night is easy for hiding, Sultan, but daylight requires courage." Rashid studied them, searching for a hint of deceit. There was none. The stranger's presence radiated calm certainty, a quiet strength that unsettled and intrigued him. "You have courage," he said, "or perhaps you are foolish. Few dare enter this palace unafraid, fewer still approach me without hesitation." A faint smile touched the stranger's lips. "Fear does not serve me," they said, "and hesitation, well, it wastes time better spent learning, seeing, and understanding." Rashid felt a strange pull toward them, a force he could not name. For decades, he had relied on power to keep people near him and fear to keep them away. Yet here was someone immune to both, someone who treated him not as a sultan but as a man. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. They walked together slowly through the gardens, speaking quietly, the air filled with unspoken understanding. The stranger shared stories of distant lands, of roads lined with storms and cities buried in dust, of nights spent under endless stars and mornings that promised nothing but hope. Rashid listened, enthralled. He rarely spoke of himself, but somehow he found himself opening, telling fragments of his own story, of the throne that felt like a cage, the crown that weighed heavier than gold, and the curse that had driven countless hearts away. The stranger did not flinch at his words. They did not recoil or pity. They simply listened, their gaze steady, understanding without judgment. And that alone made Rashid feel lighter, as if some of the burden he carried had been lifted, if only for a moment. Hours passed, yet neither spoke of leaving. The shadows grew long, the sun dipping toward the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft pinks. And yet, despite the beauty, a sense of unease crept over Rashid. "Why are you here?" he finally asked. "Why risk entering a palace where fear and power rule every corridor? Why come to me, a man cursed and feared by all who try to love him?" The stranger stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Their eyes held a depth that seemed to reach into his very soul. "Because someone must," they said softly. "Because I have seen the weight you carry, and I believe even shadows can be guided toward light. You have waited for someone to approach you, not with fear, not with desire, but with understanding. I am here because I choose to." Rashid's chest tightened, and for the first time in years he felt a flicker of hope. It was fragile, delicate, and dangerous, yet it thrummed through him like a heartbeat. He wanted to trust, to believe, but the curse that had haunted him for decades whispered a warning in every corner of his mind. "Do not let anyone near. They will break. You will break. The curse will win." But the stranger remained calm, unshaken, and persistent. "I do not seek to break you," they said, "nor to control you. I seek only to understand, and perhaps to help you understand yourself." Rashid's hands clenched at his sides. He had never encountered anyone like this. He was used to flattery, to fear, to obedience, but never to honesty, never to someone who met him without the need to bow or flatter. It was dizzying and yet irresistible. As twilight fell, the stranger guided him to a quiet pavilion in the gardens, a small, hidden space few knew existed. Lanterns flickered with a soft, golden glow, casting long shadows over the marble floor. Here they could speak freely, without guards or ministers, without the weight of crowns or kingdoms. "You have seen many," the stranger said, "those who tried and failed. Why do you let them come?" Rashid considered the question, looking out at the darkening gardens. "Because even in failure there is hope," he said. "Hope that one day someone might succeed where others could not, but I have given up expecting it. None have ever understood." The stranger reached out just a hand's length away, though they did not touch him. "Then perhaps it is time to stop expecting and start choosing," they said. "Perhaps someone must not wait for permission or invitation, but simply act." Rashid felt the words settle over him like rain on dry earth. There was truth in them, a daring challenge he could not ignore. Yet he could not speak of the emotions rising within him, the stirrings of something dangerous, something he had long buried. "You are bold," he said finally, his voice low, measured, "and dangerous." The stranger smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but I am also honest. That is more dangerous than courage or strength, for it asks the heart to answer without shield or sword." A silence fell over the garden, broken only by the distant call of birds returning to their nests and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Rashid felt a pull, a temptation that he had not felt in decades. It was not desire in the way he had once known, but a deep, compelling curiosity. For hours they spoke, walking through the gardens, exploring hidden corners, discovering quiet spaces. Rashid realized he had been watching the world, ruling it but never truly seeing it, or himself. And in the presence of this stranger he saw both for the first time. And yet, even as the connection deepened, an unease lingered. The stranger's origins were unknown, their motives unclear, and the palace itself seemed to whisper warnings. The curse was still alive, still watching, still waiting. One wrong step, one misjudged word could undo everything. As night fell and the lanterns flickered, casting dancing shadows over the garden paths, Rashid realized the stranger would not stay forever. They had a life beyond these walls, secrets untold, paths yet to walk. And the thought of losing them after this first night, of their presence vanishing into the darkness, filled him with a sharp ache he could not name. Finally, the stranger stopped at the edge of the northern garden, near a hidden gate that led to the city beyond. They turned to him, eyes steady, voice quiet but firm. "I will return," they said, echoing the promise from that first night. "But understand this, Sultan, the path ahead is not easy. You will have to choose. You will have to face what has kept you alone for so long. And you must decide if you are ready to see yourself clearly or remain a shadow behind a throne." Rashid swallowed, words caught in his throat. I will be ready," he said, though he was unsure if it was a promise or a prayer. The stranger inclined their head once more, then vanished into the night, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves and the lingering scent of jasmine. Rashid stood alone in the garden, the cool night air brushing against his face. For the first time in decades, he felt something he had long forgotten: anticipation. A dangerous, thrilling, terrifying anticipation that whispered of change, of hope, of the possibility that even a cursed heart could be understood, and perhaps healed. And as he walked back to the palace, shadows stretching long behind him, he knew one truth with certainty: nothing would ever be the same again. The sun had barely risen over the city of Almarath, painting the palace towers in a pale gold, when Sultan Rashid stood in the throne room restless. The encounter with the stranger the previous night had left him restless, awake with thoughts he could neither control nor dismiss. He walked from one end of the hall to the other, fingers brushing the cold marble pillars, eyes tracing the golden patterns etched into the walls. The palace was quiet, save for the distant sounds of servants preparing for the morning rituals. But Rashid felt the weight of unseen eyes. Not spies, not enemies, something else, something older, older than the walls of the palace themselves. He sensed it in the air, in the subtle shift of shadows across the floor. A presence that whispered danger, a reminder that his heart was still bound by the curse that had claimed countless others before. And then, as if summoned by thought alone, the stranger appeared in the doorway. Their movements were silent, graceful, almost ethereal. Rashid's chest tightened at the sight of them. The quiet confidence in their eyes had not dimmed with daylight. If anything, it had grown stronger. "You came early," Rashid said, his voice low but not questioning. "I did not wish to waste the day," the stranger replied. "There is much to do and little time to hesitate. I have come because the palace is not as quiet as it seems. There are forces at work you do not yet understand." Rashid raised an eyebrow. "Forces? Speak plainly." The stranger stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Not all who walk in light are what they seem. There are shadows in your palace, spirits, remnants of curses from your ancestors and creatures bound to your bloodline. They linger, waiting for weakness. I have seen them, and if we do not act, they will grow stronger." Rashid felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had ruled through force and fear, had fought armies and enemies with steel and strategy. Yet this threat was different, invisible, unseen. A force he could not crush with a sword or intimidate with command. "You speak as if you have faced them before," he said, curiosity mixed with unease. "I have," the stranger admitted, "and I have survived. But only those who face such darkness together, trusting one another, can hope to prevail. And Sultan, I will not face this alone." Rashid studied them, the weight of their words settling like stones in his chest. They were not just daring, they were confident, prepared, unafraid. And in that fearlessness, he saw the possibility of something long denied to him: partnership, understanding, even trust. "I do not often trust," Rashid said, voice rough, "and I do not often allow anyone near the darkness I carry." The stranger smiled faintly, their eyes softening. "Then perhaps it is time you tried." Rashid hesitated, torn between caution and the pull he felt toward this mysterious figure. He had spent years alone, isolated by power and by the curse that rejected all who approached with desire or affection. Yet he could not deny the strange hope rising in his chest, the hope that perhaps this time things might be different. "Very well," he said finally. "Show me what you see. Lead the way." The stranger nodded and guided him through hidden corridors of the palace, corridors Rashid had never known existed. They passed secret staircases, hidden doorways and forgotten rooms, places where the sunlight never touched and where the air smelled of dust and old magic. The Sultan felt both awe and unease. Here was the palace he had ruled for decades, yet it now seemed a living, breathing entity, full of mysteries he had never understood. At last they arrived in a vast chamber beneath the palace, its ceilings arched high, walls covered with ancient runes that glimmered faintly in the dim light. The stranger paused, eyes scanning the symbols, hands hovering just above the carvings. "This is the heart of the palace," they explained. "The place where your ancestors bound their power and the place where shadows linger longest. Here is where the curse began, and here is where it must be confronted." Rashid stepped forward, feeling the cold air brush against his skin. He had felt many things in this room: fear, reverence, power, but never vulnerability. The presence of the stranger beside him made him feel exposed, yet strangely protected. "What must we do?" he asked. "We must awaken the guardians," the stranger said. "Not to fight, but to reveal what has remained hidden, and to show us the truths we cannot see in daylight." With careful gestures, the stranger traced the runes on the wall, speaking words Rashid did not understand. The air thickened, charged with energy, and shadows shifted along the walls, forming shapes that seemed alive. Figures emerged, not solid but not completely invisible, ghostly reflections of past rulers, warriors, and advisors. Their eyes glimmered, watching, judging. Rashid felt a chill run down his spine. "What are they?" "Guardians of the bloodline," the stranger said softly. "They are neither friend nor foe, only observers. They will test us, reveal the truth of what lies in your heart, and warn us of the darkness that seeks to grow." One of the shadowy figures stepped forward, eyes like coals glowing in the darkness. Rashid felt its gaze pierce through him, exposing his fears, his regrets, the loneliness he had carried for decades. The stranger stood close, hand hovering near his arm, not touching but present, steadying him. "You do not fear me," Rashid said quietly, surprised at his own words. "I do not fear what is true," the stranger replied. "Fear blinds, understanding illuminates." The shadows swirled, voices whispering unintelligible words that somehow carried meaning. Rashid's mind raced, memories of failures, losses, and broken hearts flashing before his eyes. And yet, through it all, the presence of the stranger gave him courage. For the first time, he faced not just the palace's mysteries, but his own heart, knowing someone beside him would not turn away. The largest shadow stepped closer, its form more defined than the others. It spoke in a voice that resonated like a drum in the chamber. "You are the ruler of men, but not yet the master of yourself. Shadows linger where fear resides. Trust must be earned, but also given freely." Rashid felt a lump in his throat. He had ruled armies, kingdoms, and cities. Yet here he was, being taught by a ghost of his ancestors what he had never learned. That courage without understanding and power without connection was incomplete. The stranger's hand brushed his sleeve, just lightly enough to remind him of their presence. Rashid's chest tightened, a strange heat rising, though his mind focused. Together they began to speak to the shadows, answering questions that had no words, showing courage that had no banners, revealing truths that could not be hidden. Hours passed in the dim chamber. Rashid felt exhaustion seep into his bones, but also a strange exhilaration. The shadows began to shift, the air lighter, the energy calmer. The largest figure stepped back, eyes still glowing. "You have begun the path," it said. "But beware, the darkness is patient and temptation is its ally." Only those who remain true to themselves and each other may overcome. Rashid exhaled, his body tense but his spirit lighter than it had been in decades. He looked at the stranger, whose eyes met his with unwavering trust. I think I understand," he whispered almost to himself. "I think I am beginning to understand." The stranger smiled faintly. "Understanding is the first step, action is the next, and soon the darkness will test us beyond words." As they left the hidden chamber, the palace felt different. The corridors seemed alive with quiet energy, the walls themselves whispering approval. Rashid realized that he had never truly walked these halls before, never truly seen them or himself within them. And yet, despite the small victory, a sense of foreboding lingered. The curse was not gone. The shadows were patient. And somewhere, hidden in the palace's deepest corners, the darkness waited, ready to strike at the first sign of weakness. That evening, Rashid and the stranger sat in the palace's high tower, watching the city lights twinkle like scattered stars. The air was cool, the breeze soft against their skin. They spoke little, sharing instead a quiet understanding, a connection that words could not capture. Rashid realized something he had never allowed himself to feel. Longing, not for power, nor for fear, nor for wealth, but for closeness, for trust, for someone who could see him without flinching. And in that moment, he knew that this connection, fragile though it might be, was worth the risk of facing the darkness that awaited them both. But as night fell over Almerath, and the palace settled into uneasy quiet, neither of them noticed the faintest ripple in the shadows at the edge of the city, a darkness that moved with purpose, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Rashid felt a shiver run down his spine, though he did not yet understand why. Something was coming, something that would test not only his courage but the bond he was beginning to form with the stranger. And as he watched the stars blink in the night sky, a single thought haunted him. This is only the beginning. The night was heavy over the city of Almerath. The palace stood tall and silent, golden towers reflecting the faint light of the moon. But within its walls, shadows stirred. Sultan Rashid walked through the corridors with purposeful steps, the weight of the previous encounters pressing against him. His heart beat faster than it had in years, not from fear, but from anticipation. The stranger had promised him that the darkness would come, and now he could feel it drawing closer. The palace seemed alive with tension. Every door, every tapestry, every candle flickering in the halls seemed to watch him. Rashid had faced armies, rebellions, and treacherous advisors, yet this felt different. The darkness that waited was not a mere enemy of flesh or steel. It was older, deeper, and closer to home than anything he had known, and he would not face it alone. From the shadows, the stranger emerged. Their eyes met his with calm determination, and Rashid felt a mixture of relief and courage. "It is time," they said softly. "The darkness waits for us, but together we can face it." Rashid nodded, gripping the hilt of his ceremonial sword. "I have walked alone too long," he said. "If we fail, then the curse continues. But if we succeed, perhaps we will see the light that has eluded me all my life." They descended into the hidden chamber beneath the palace, the place where the guardian shadows had spoken to them days before. The runes on the walls glowed faintly, reacting to their presence. Rashid felt the chill of the air, the weight of history pressing down, yet the stranger's hand brushing his arm reminded him that he was not alone. The shadows shifted as they approached the center of the chamber. A deep, cold voice echoed through the space, a sound that vibrated in the bones. "You are strong, Sultan, yet the darkness feeds on your fear. Only those who are willing to confront themselves may survive." Rashid's chest tightened. He had feared so many things in his life: betrayal, loss, loneliness. But this fear was different. It was not about himself. It was about the kingdom, about the lives that depended on his courage, about the strange, fragile hope that the stranger had awakened in his heart. The shadows formed into a dark figure, taller than any man, its eyes glowing like embers. It moved with a silent grace, and Rashid realized this was the manifestation of the curse itself, the weight that had haunted his family for generations. "I will not flee," Rashid said firmly, raising his sword. "I will not hide. You will not take what I have learned, what I have come to cherish." The strangers stepped beside him, their presence steadying him. "Remember," they said quietly, "strength is not only in the sword but in the heart that dares to feel, to trust, and to act. Do not let fear control you." The darkness lunged, a swirl of shadows and cold air that threatened to consume the chamber. Rashid's sword met it, cutting through the smoke and mist, yet the shadow reformed instantly, relentless and unyielding. "You cannot defeat me alone," the darkness hissed, its voice like wind through stone. "Your heart is bound. Your soul is chained." Rashid faltered for a moment, doubt creeping into his mind. But then he felt the stranger's hand on his arm, warm and firm. Their eyes met, and in that gaze he found the courage he had never known. It was not the courage of armies or thrones, but the courage of trust, connection, and vulnerability. "I am not alone," Rashid said, his voice strong, "and together we will break this." The stranger nodded, and together they moved as one, weaving through the chamber, their actions synchronized, their hearts united in purpose. Rashid spoke the words the stranger had taught him, words of truth, of courage, of acceptance. The shadow shrieked, twisting and recoiling, unable to maintain its form against the strength of their combined will. For the first time in centuries, the curse faltered. Rashid felt a lightness in his chest, a warmth that spread through him like sunlight breaking through clouds. The shadow writhed, then shattered into countless pieces, evaporating like mist in the morning sun. The chamber, once heavy with fear, was now quiet and calm. Rashid fell to his knees, exhausted but smiling. The stranger knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It is done," they said softly. "The curse is broken. You are free to choose your own heart, Sultan." Tears threatened to fall from Rashid's eyes, not from pain but from relief. He had carried so much loneliness, so much fear, that he had forgotten the possibility of hope. And now, with the stranger by his side, he could feel it, delicate, fragile, but undeniably real. "You have shown me something I thought lost," Rashid said, his voice trembling. "Trust, courage, love. I do not know what the future holds, but I feel alive, truly alive for the first time." The stranger smiled, a soft, radiant smile that lit the chamber more than any lantern could. "And you will see," they said. "The future is what you choose to make. Shadows may linger, but they cannot dominate a heart that is willing to face the light." They rose together, stepping out of the hidden chamber and into the gardens, where the first light of dawn painted the marble paths in gold. The city below was waking, unaware of the night's events, yet the palace felt transformed. The air itself seemed lighter, brighter, filled with possibility. Rashid turned to the stranger, his eyes steady, no longer shadowed by doubt. "Stay with me," he said simply. "Not as a guest, not as a protector, but as someone who walks this path with me." The stranger's gaze softened. "I have chosen this path," they said, "and I will walk it with you, Sultan, not out of duty, but out of the belief that together we can face anything." For a long moment they stood in silence, the world around them bathed in dawn's first light. The palace, once heavy with shadows and curses, now felt alive, welcoming, a home rather than a prison. And in that silence, Rashid understood something he had never allowed himself to believe. That connection, trust, and courage could heal even the deepest wounds. As the sun climbed higher, the two of them walked through the gardens, discovering corners untouched by time, speaking softly of hopes, dreams, and fears. Rashid realized that the stranger had brought more than courage. They had brought understanding, a gift he had longed for but never known to ask. And yet, despite the calm, a small part of him remained alert. He had learned that the world was full of shadows, that even after victory, vigilance was necessary. But now, he was no longer alone. He had someone who would stand by him, someone who had seen him in his darkest moments and remained. Days passed and the palace seemed lighter, almost as if it were breathing. The courtiers noticed the change in the Sultan, less distant, less guarded, more present. Whispers spread that a new bond had formed, though none understood its depth. Rashid paid them no mind. His focus was on the one who had stood by him, the one who had faced the darkness and emerged unbroken. Evenings were spent in quiet companionship, exploring the gardens, reading in the hidden library, speaking of history, magic, and the dreams that still lingered beyond the walls. Rashid felt a joy he had not known in decades, a warmth that reached beyond the throne and the crown. He began to understand that power was not only in command, but in connection, in trust, and in the courage to face vulnerability. One night, as the lanterns flickered and the city slept, the stranger leaned close, their voice barely a whisper. "You have come far, Sultan. You have faced shadows not just in the world but in yourself, and now the dawn is yours." Rashid's heart swelled. "I have not done it alone," he said, "and I will not face the days ahead alone either." The stranger smiled, their hand brushing his lightly. "Then we walk together, Sultan, into the dawn and whatever it may bring." The first rays of morning stretched across the palace, spilling into the gardens, illuminating the marble paths and blooming flowers. Rashid breathed deeply, the scent of jasmine and rose filling his senses. For the first time he felt a freedom he had never known, not freedom from enemies, not freedom from politics, but freedom of heart. The palace, once a place of shadows and fear, now held promise. The curse had been broken, but more importantly, a new story had begun. A story of courage, trust, understanding, and the delicate, unshakable bond between two souls. And as the Sultan and the stranger stood side by side, watching the city awaken, Rashid felt a truth he had long forgotten. That love, trust, and hope were not weaknesses, but the greatest strengths of all. In the quiet of the palace gardens, a gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine. Rashid closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the stranger's presence beside him. No shadows lingered here, no curses remained, only the promise of tomorrow, bright and unbroken. And somewhere in the calm, the Sultan whispered to himself, a soft, almost prayerful sound. "Perhaps this time it is truly different. The end."